ideological, what we refer to in the Marxist terms as the superstructure, the realm of ideology. So she says, unless the human psyche is changed, and unless the sexual roles that men and women play are changed, the psychosexual drama is changed, because that has produced the men and women, as we know this today. And therefore, women's liberation comes through a combination of Marxism and Freudian psychoanalysis, according to relationship. Now, I'm not going into the elements of Freudian psychoanalysis in any way today, because Ruby is going to do that tonight. Mitchell speculated that the reason progress towards women's liberation is so slow is that the family, which he associated with reproduction, sexuality, and socialization of children, serves ideological and biosocial as well as economic functions. We've seen the economic function of the family in Marxism. Now, in Mitchell, we see the role that the family plays in the socialization of children and in reproduction and sexuality. Even if a socialist mode of production requires the end of the family as an economic unit, it cannot end the family as an ideological and biosocial unit, because of the way in which our psyches have been constituted. Women's oppression as women will persist until our psyches have a revolution, equivalent to the economic one that affects the transition from capitalism to socialism. Then in her book, Psychoanalysis and Feminism, she reasserts that human society as we know it is patriarchal, and therefore whatever a woman's color, status, ethnicity, etc., in relation to the law of the father, which is patriarchy, one woman will have approximately the same status and function as any other. Therefore, the social reforms that have been posited by liberal feminists would only scratch the surface in redressing women's oppression. Similarly, she criticized the radical feminists for believing that reproductive technology could be the key to women's liberation, because, as she says, a biological solution cannot solve a psychological problem. Since patriarchy is human society, overthrow of patriarchy is the overthrow of human society as we know it today. So she says patriarchy is essential to human society. It is the basic structure of human society. Because, and across time, she feels that patriarchy is a constant. It has always existed. Because Mitchell considers capitalism as an economic mode and patriarchy as an ideological mode, as two separate and autonomous spheres, we should use Marxist strategies to overthrow capitalism and replace it with socialism. But the problem is that what is to replace patriarchy? We can change an economic mode of production and have another mode of production. But how are we going to handle patriarchy? And this is, I think, to me, one of the central questions of feminism, and something that perhaps we can discuss after we have done a presentation as well. Because at least Mitchell has no answer to this question. And in fact, she's fairly pessimistic about it, because, as she says, no, and I'm quoting from her, no society has as yet existed or existed for a sufficient length of time for the eternal unconscious to have shed its immortal nature. So she's seeing again the persistence of patriarchy through different historical epochs. While matrilineages are certainly to be found, it seems as though matriarchies can be moved out. So she does not agree, and this has been a major criticism by anthropologists of Engels, that the matriarchal societies that we call them have never really existed. Matrilineal societies say that matriarchies are hard to discover, and we know very little about them. And so she's sort of fairly pessimistic, because she says, what are we looking back to? I mean, what golden age are we looking back to? The revival of what? And the revolution within the human psyche, the eternal unconscious, as we will, and its immortal nature is going to take a long period of time. However, it is very important. It's also important to note at this stage that Mitchell looks at capitalism and patriarchy as two separate and autonomous spheres. One which can be overthrown and replaced by socialism, and the other is the shedding of the ideological, the superstructure. Heidi Hartman is also a dual systems theorist, like Juliet Mitchell. But she is one who gives a materialist account of patriarchy as well as capitalism. What Juliet Mitchell does is that she gives a materialist account of capitalism and a non-materialist account of patriarchy. Because she says patriarchy is in the realm of ideology, and ideology is superstructure. And psychology and ideology together are the superstructures, and the economic base remains intact. But Heidi Hartman gives a materialist account of patriarchy as well as capitalism. Whereas Mitchell views patriarchy as the ideological form of women's oppression, represented in each person's unconscious by the Oedipus complex, Hartman views it as a structure of relations in society that has a very material base in men's historical control over women's labor power. So, again, she is a materialist, Heidi Hartman. She feels that the structure of relations in society, even the ideological what Juliet Mitchell says is ideological and therefore has a non-material base, she says no, it has a material base. Even the ideological has a material base. It's rooted in man's historical control over women's labor power. Whereas the traditional Marxist analysis has focused on how women stand in relation to production, Hartman asks the feminist question: how do women stand in relation to men? And her definition of patriarchy is a set of social relations between men which have a material base and which, though hierarchical, establish or create interdependence and solidarity among men that enable them to dominate women. So basically what she is saying is that there are class structures in society between different men, but across class structures there is a solidarity between men to keep women down, to oppress women. And this material base rests on man's control over women's labor power. And whichever class of society we're looking at, man continues to have control over women's labor power. For example, men restrict women's access to important economic resources. They disallow women control over sexuality and reproduction. Their control varies from society to society, but in every society there is a degree of control that men exercise over women's sexuality and reproduction. The number of children that the woman is going to have is determined by men. Whether she uses contraception or does not use contraception is decided by men. So men control women's sexuality. And of course another way is through the monogamous heterosexual marriage, female childbearing and rearing, female domestic work, women's economic dependence on men, other institutions of male government. Therefore, patriarchy operates mostly in the material realm and not in the psychological realm. She disagrees with Juliet Mitchell, and she says what you call an ideological oppression of women in the psychological realm is actually, if you were to examine it closely, it has a material basis as well. It is not just in the mind, but actually rooted historically and materially. Whereas Marxism believes that patriarchy will wither away in the face of capitalism's need to proletarise everyone, feminist analysis predicts that capitalism and patriarchy will reach some sort of compromise on the women's question, as it did with the family wage in the past. So they feel that capitalism co-opts women, and that capitalism and patriarchy therefore will not allow a resolution of this question. Capitalist forces are pushing more women into the marketplace, but through sexual division of labor, patriarchy maintains the subordinate status of women both in the workplace and in the home. In the workplace, how do they do it? By paying women less. In the home, they do it by the burden of the double day. Woman who goes out to work and comes back and is responsible for work at home as well. Therefore, it is clear that men's desire to control women is as strong as capital's desire to control the worker. So they make this link between capital's desire to control worker and men's desire to control women. Therefore, according to Heidi Hartman, capitalism and patriarchy are not two heads of the same piece, but two different beasts to be fought with different people like Iris Young have critiqued these dual system theorists like Juliet Mitchell and Heidi Hartman. Iris Young sees the ideological accounts of patriarchy as being too universalistic and impervious to historical change. The same criticism that was made by socialist feminists of radical feminists now is being, one group is accusing the other of continuing with that. Patriarchy functions differently in different classes in society. So you cannot make universalistic assumptions because these universalistic assumptions engender hopelessness about women. Like we've seen that Juliet Mitchell is unable to answer the question of how patriarchy is going to be overthrown because she says it is a universal system, and therefore she's actually saying that the same kind of patriarchy operates all across the globe. Whereas women have strongly debated this and they have said no, we must look at the specific structures of patriarchy in every society if we are going to dismantle those structures. We will never be able to dismantle the structures of patriarchy if we look at them in this very sort of ahistorical and universalizing fashion, because then there is a hopelessness. Well, patriarchy is a universal system, it's all over the globe, so somewhere it must be rooted in the nature of men, so what are we going to do about it? We're never going to be able to get rid of it. But if you make it specific, if you make it historical, if you make it specific to each society, then you may be able to develop tools to overcome patriarchy, which is specific. That is why certain people like Iris Young feel that it is important to understand the historical specificity of patriarchy in every society, and not just to say patriarchy is a universal system, because it operates very differently. If ever we are going to overthrow it, in every society must be examined differently. She also feels that because, reading Juliet Mitchell especially, she says that it may lead to the false impression that because patriarchy exists primarily in the head, i.e. in the realm of ideas, it is not as oppressive to women as the nitty-gritty facts of capitalist life. She also feels that these theorists, they do not really challenge Marxism because in their account, capitalism remains the primary cause of women's oppression, and the other is relegated to the realm of ideology. Although, of course, Heidi Hartman does give a material base for ideology as well. So materialist accounts of both capitalism and patriarchy still make a division between the home and the family, and on the one hand, and the outside. And patriarchy occurs in the home, and capitalism occurs in the outside. So they're saying the dual systems theorists are still making the division between the public and the private sphere. The sphere of the home, in which patriarchy occurs, and the sphere of the outside world, in which capitalism occurs. And they're not really succeeding in integrating these two. They're seeing both forms of oppression, but they're making this dichotomy between the public and the private, which feminists have been trying to eliminate as part of their strategy. Young feels that this distinction is false. There's no inside to the family until capitalism created an outside for it. Because all production used to occur within the family. So there was no inside and outside. This inside and outside was created by capitalism. And therefore, you now accept the divide that capitalism has created between, and to legitimize the divide, even in their theorizing, is a false way of going about it. And she feels also, Iris Young, that working women's oppression is not explained by this distinction either. Her goal was a thoroughly feminist historical materialism. That is what Iris Young says. So, what we really need is a thoroughly feminist historical materialism in which gender differentiation is moved from the periphery of Marxism to its core. That let us not tack on the women's issue to Marxism and say we have resolved the women's issue. You have not resolved it unless you make it central to the debate of Marxism. And you do not make it central to the debate of Marxism if you are positing a patriarchy within the home and capitalism outside. Even if you, like Heidi Hartman, give it a materialist base, but you're still saying that there are two separate systems operating. One is operating within the home and one is operating outside it. Whereas, according to Iris Young, this is not the situation at all. So she proposes a unified system. Her position is that capitalism was not gender neutral. That is, men and women workers are not interchangeable, but is gender biased. Capitalism, not patriarchy. She says capitalism is not gender neutral, it's gender biased. And in fact, the marginalization of women and its functioning as a secondary labor force is central to that. Because capitalism is very aware of its workers' gender, race, and ethnicity. Capitalism just does not say, give me a worker and I'll take any worker. Because actually that is what Marx said. Race, color, class, everything, gender gets eliminated. And the worker is the primary, the worker and the capitalist is the primary participant. But what Iris Young is saying is that capitalism is very discriminating. And she's talking obviously of contemporary capitalism. And she says it really discriminates and notes very carefully the gender, the race, and the ethnicity of the worker. And it classifies workers into primary workers, which are men, and secondary workers, which in this instance we're really just talking of women, if we could add race and ethnicity to it as well. So the secondary workers are the women, and the primary workers are the men. And it reinforces this division between men and women to keep the wages low and to meet unanticipated demands for increased supply of goods and services. The primary workers are men are in the workforce. But if capitalism needs increased production at any historical moment in time, then the secondary workforce is called in. The next point she makes is that women experience patriarchy on the job and not just at home. Women experience not discrimination, but patriarchy on the job and not just at home. And she says this is illustrated by sexual harassment on the job, uncompensated, unequal wages, and all the dynamics of this public-private. So she says that when you are a worker and on the job, you are not just being discriminated against as a worker, but you are actually being discriminated against, and not just by the capitalists, but by the workers as well, because you are a woman. And there you see naked patriarchy in the workplace. So far, we've gotten used to the fact that there's patriarchy within the home and, the father figure and the patriarch within the home. Now she's saying, look at the patriarchy that women experience on the job. Therefore, while historically speaking patriarchy may have preceded capitalism, it is not a system separate from capitalism, only its shape has changed. So, in fact, class and gender structures are so intertwined that neither one actually precedes the other. So, it's not two systems of home. It's not capitalism and patriarchy. It's capitalistic patriarchy or patriarchal capitalism. Now, I'm not going to sort of go on with this because I think perhaps when Bunny is doing her global economy, and when she's talking about how women have been marginalized or how third world women have been marginalized or drawn into this global capitalistic market, actually Maria Mies has done some very interesting work on this as well. Women is the last colony, as she says.
Two chapters in the book on the book.
So I think it's really at that point that we really need to have a discussion on how women are drawn into this global network of capitalism, and how they have been marginalized as the workforce, and how there have been the sweatshops in the third world and women being a part of it. Maybe we can do that, especially if Maria Mies' chapters are looked at. I think I have women as the last colony. Another socialist feminist is Alison Jagger, and she takes up another Marxist concept, and this is Marxist concept of alienation, which again I think I have on the sheet that I gave you, and which I discussed with you as fragmentation and as the disjunction between the work that man does and the product from all those processes and people, she needs to achieve wholeness as a person. So why is woman fragmented? And she is now using not the Marxist concept of class, but the Marxist concept of alienation to understand this fragmentation in the realm of motherhood and in the realm of intellectuality. In the realm of sexuality, she says that as a wage worker is alienated from the product of his work. Woman is really alienated from the product she works on, and the product she works on is her body. And she looks at the whole image of women and how society has created women. For example, she says that a woman may say that she diets and dresses for herself, but it probably is for a man. And in this way, her body can be appropriated from her as a wage worker's labor is taken away at any time from him. As the wage worker's labor is appropriated by the capitalist, a woman's body is appropriated from him. And this can, this happens in countless ways in society, from men passing comments to the ultimate act of violence or rape. And this eventually reduces her body to an object both for herself and for men. So a woman begins to see herself and work on her body as if she's working on an object. So the plucking and the tweezing and the makeup and everything that we do to ourselves is because we're not doing it, we're doing it to an object. Like you create an object, you are creating the image of yourself, and you are creating that image, and others are creating this image of you as well. So it works in both ways. Society creates the image of the woman, and the woman works on her body as if it was an object as well. As a wage worker competes with other wage workers for money, so a woman competes with other women for attention. And since all of this is largely done to get the attention of men, therefore this competitiveness and rivalry takes place among women in society for the attention of a man. So this is one way that she feels that a woman is alienated from her sexuality and from her body. The other is her alienation from motherhood. And Alison Jagger feels that she is alienated from the product of her labor, which is the decision on how many children to bear. It's often not hers. And many women are pressured by men, individuals, by society, and by the state into unwanted abortions or sterilization, depending on what society demands at that given moment or what the state feels should be the family planning program. 2 children per child, or 1, or 0, or 5. In different periods of time, women have been told how many children they have to bear, and these decisions are often taken away from her, and they may be appropriated by individual men in their lives, or by society, by their communities in which they live, or by the state. She also says that a woman is alienated from the process of her reproductive labor. Reproductive technology, which for some radical feminists were the answer or the solution to women's oppression, in fact, she says are alienating, foreign, intimidating. And the woman is often not told or consulted about what is happening to her. She talks about this whole business of the male gynecologist as the sort of, mystifying the whole process, not even telling women what is happening to them, and this cold, impersonal atmosphere in which children are born, and you go to a gynecologist, which is absolutely true, and I think each one of us must have experienced it. That they just will not tell you what is the matter with you, or what they're going to do with you, or what the process of childbirth is. And they are the pundits in the white coats, who have all knowledge, and they are the repositories of knowledge. And you are the ignorant woman, although it is the most normal thing in the world to have a child. And originally, children were born in homes and there were midwives who attended to them, and it was a totally different atmosphere. But now there are these large impersonal hospitals and these men, in control of technologies and control of knowledge, and a woman begins to feel alienated from it. And then she goes into detail, which I'm not going, but this whole business of artificial insemination, surrogate motherhood, vitro fertilization, and how this has affected women, all these new reproductive technologies. She also says that like childbearing has become an alienating experience for women, child rearing is an alienating experience as well. Because at least in the Western capitalist world, it has been taken over by experts, like everything is taken over by experts. There are all these countless books on how to bring up your children. And then, there are sort of the male specialists like Dr. Spock who tell you, from the minute your baby is born or is in the womb, how you should behave, what you should eat, what you should do, how you should or should not discipline the child. And the mother is, the experience of the community or the experience of the mother or nothing counts except, these sort of, these ways in which the mother is told how to behave towards her own child. And she says that what is happening in capitalist societies is that both mother and children are ceasing to see each other as people and are beginning to see each other as objects they're sort of beginning to see each other as objects and as in terms of whether their demands have been gratified or not. The children want to, this instant gratification of demands, and the mothers have also begun to compete with each other to create and process the perfect child. My child is, highest IQ. My child is perfect. He plays 3 instruments. My child, this sort of competition between mothers to create the perfect child. In the realm, her analysis basically deals with the Western capitalist world. In the realm of intellectuality, she says that as men set up the terms of thought and discourse, a woman feels both fearful and inferior because knowledge systems are controlled by men. And because men control knowledge systems, a woman does not count her experience or does not trust her own intellectuality. Young feels that the gender division of labor was essential to capitalism. Jagger believes that the use of the theoretical framework of alienation identifies women's contemporary oppression as a phenomenon peculiar to the capitalist form of male domination. It also makes the point that the alienation of women is heightened rather than reduced if women's awareness is raised, but the material manifestations of this domination are not dealt with. So if we raise consciousness and we do not discuss as women strategies to deal with reducing this oppression or eliminating this oppression, then in fact it creates further psychological conflict and creates depression within women. Because you may have heightened their consciousness if you have shown them no way out of the system. There is a critique of the unified system theory as well, whereas the unified system approach is not without its problems. But feminists like Tong argue that if division of labor analysis is a more useful category than class, and it also happens to be one that appears as frequently in Marx's own work, to analyze women's oppression, the most effective way to overthrow capitalist patriarchy is to move women from the secondary workforce into the primary workforce. In a way, this is quite interesting because we've gone full circle and come back to the original Marxist resolution of moving women into the workforce. One way of doing it is to participate in the comparable work action struggle. The comparable work action struggle is equal pay for equal work. And this is a struggle that socialist feminists have been, along with liberal feminists. Now the reasons may be different, but this is where both join hands. Liberal feminists also want equal pay for equal work, and socialist feminists also, participated very active in this campaign. As it is a comparable way to demarginalize women's work that weakens class structures and gender structures, simultaneously. Young feels that as a socialist feminist, to address issues such as sexual abuse is to struggle against capitalism and patriarchy at one and the same time. So although the struggle against domestic violence against women is a radical feminist struggle, but again socialist feminists have joined hands with radical feminists because they say to address this is to attack capitalism and attack patriarchy at the same time. I think that is roughly what I would like to do. Alison Jarrett does make specific proposals for social changes in the area of reproductive freedom, wages, organizational independence for women, and she outlines ways to incorporate these in our daily lives and in the socialist feminist agenda. But I'm not going into the details of that here because I'm basically trying to give you the theoretical framework of the socialist feminist and how basically I think one can conclude by saying that socialist feminists have taken, as I say, from the insights provided by radical feminists and from the insights provided by psychoanalysis and women, people who have worked with that. And basically, what they're doing is that they are bringing in patriarchy and capitalism, and they're showing the different relations of patriarchy and capitalism. And they are definitely saying that you cannot overthrow patriarchy unless you overthrow capitalism. But they're not saying that if you overthrow capitalism, you will have overthrown patriarchy, which is what the Marxist said. But if you overthrow capitalism, you will have overthrown patriarchy. And they are trying definitely to show a material basis for patriarchy. Even in the ideological realm, people like Heidi Hartman have tried to show, and Iris Young have tried to show the material basis for women's differences. The differences are between, is the ideological rooted in the sort of economic structures of society, or is it not rooted in economic structures of society? But basically, they are attacking capitalism and patriarchy at the same time. Some people who criticize them say that really socialist feminists just pretend to have advanced over Marxist feminists, that basically they're really Marxist at heart, and that for them class is a primary category. But I, for one, don't agree with that. I think that they're squarely addressing themselves to the issue of patriarchy, and they haven't come up with any decisive sort of recipe for overthrowing patriarchy. But I would certainly agree with Iris Young that I think you need to look at the roots of patriarchy in your own specific structures and in your own society and to devise strategies. It may be a universal phenomenon, but the way it manifests itself in society is bound to vary from society to society. And therefore it is an important task of feminists to look at their own society and at the structures which need to be dismantled. Yeah, I think Bunny would like to add a few things.
Actually, in terms of the socialist feminists with strands, one is just a point I want to make in case those of you reading the material get slightly confused. What Mina has presented in terms of the dual and unified systems, these are fairly new terms that academics have thought up. But they used to be, until recently, it used to be called the Patriarchy and Capital School, which is Heidi Hartman and Judith Mitchell, and the Subordination of Women's School, which came out of Sussex University in England. The other one, incidentally, is American and German. There's a third. I mean, this is actually just not to confuse it, because some books you read will say patriarchy and capital school versus subordination. Now, the subordination and unified school is also called gender studies, and the gender issue comes up invariably, and we are using gender constantly without any understanding. And I would like to spend a little time on gender. I personally have problems with it, and will also give some of the critique of that term. But I know that everyone in our government, for example, our government and NGOs and whatever, everyone is using gender very happily. World Bank and IMF and whatever. And the subordination to the unified theory is the gender school. The one strand, the major one that Mina hasn't addressed, but is important, but we came up when we were talking about cultural feminism, is that there is a third major strand in social feminism or social feminist current, which is the Bielefeld school, German, Bielefeld. It's a university. I mean, these are coming out of debates. And the person whom you will really, the names, Maria Mies is in this. So you'll hear her name a lot. And she falls in this category, which I felt that there was a need to identify. Claudia von Verhoff, Veronica, somebody other. I mean, there's several names in this, but this is
Van Verhoff.
Van W-E-R-L-H-O-W. So I'll just spend a few minutes on the Bielefeld school. They're sometimes called ecofeminists or bordering on combining ecology and feminism, taking from the cultural feminists. Again, a lot of them are taking from the others. They're located within Marxism, but taking from radical feminism, but they take more of the cultural feminist strand from radical feminism. They would, in terms of their economic and stand, it would fall pretty much within the socialist feminist position. But they say that men and women do relate differently to nature. And this is because women produce children. And equally important, they have a productive relationship with nature which is different. They relate to nature differently. Because they are producers, they are creators, they give birth. Everything that has life around them, they relate differently to that because they give life. So that puts them in the category. They will then relate differently to the environment, and they're talking specifically of nature. Because, and in this sense, because they also produce, just as a tree or a leaf or whatever would produce, they are a part of nature. Whereas man is a part. I mean, they are a part and man is a part, and they actually will word it that way. Sorry? And they say that men have to use tools to act on nature. To relate to nature, man needs an implement. I mean, women are naturally part of nature, but men relate to nature through an intermediary, which is the tool. He's cutting a tree, chopping it, or whatever. I mean, they will go into. But that women themselves are productive. He has to do something to nature to produce it. He has to hoe, he has to plant, he has to do something to be a part of that process, whereas women are a part of it, and that's because their bodies are a part of nature, and because they produce. They will go into some detail, which I'm not even going into, and they'll justify this by saying that women do not need to destroy nature to get food, and there are a lot of theories and some speculations, again going into patriarchy of what happened historically, but they base it on the principle of women as gatherers and men as hunters. They go back to that women gathering and male as hunters. And for hunting, men develop tools. So whereas women, what they produced, so even when they developed implements, it was to do with nature, would do with creating what do you call it? So they're creating tools for nature, for agriculture to grow food, as opposed to. But male tools are destructive tools.
So they're saying that when man appropriates nature violently and makes weapons, whereas a woman appropriates nature naturally and is associated with the planting, with the country, with go, separate nurturing, and man by violence, by procreation.
And historically, they'll go into things that men then therefore had to create the initial stone in terms of getting an animal, hitting an animal, whereas women developed the hoe, the basket. These are the types of production, types of tools or whatever that women developed. And these were productive tools as opposed to male, which are destructive tools. There's a whole debate on it. Many of these days go into that. Mariamis particularly has done a lot of work on it, and it's very interesting work. So one is actually not going to go into it because it is a very large debate, but their whole theory on patriarchy and the growth and